If there's ever someone who knows India's financial space better than KV Kamath, we haven't come across that person. So great to have you, Mr. Kamath, here in Davos with NDTV. And I've got to start with that very conversation because in India, there have been multiple reports coming in of IMF lowering its growth forecast, this big concern of a demonetization shock, however temporary it might be. Do you feel that the financial nerves here are rattled?
Well, I will go back 3 months when most of the pundits said the same thing about normalcy coming back to the system. And I guess that most people would say that it is now back to more or less normal in India. I think the same goes for growth. People, I think, have tried to assess what would be the impact rather too quickly. And we are not in the linear world anymore. There are a whole lot of consequences. And I think we have to trust when the government says there's a whole new digital equation coming. And just look at numbers. I was looking at people taking flights. And December was a bumper month. November was a bumper month. So clearly people are using, have the spending power and are not afraid to use it. And if airline growth was 25% year on year in the month of December, I don't know where the pundits get an idea that growth is going to slow down. Yes, indeed. I think people will measure purchases like a home because they are expecting prices to go down. Maybe durables, they will expect prices to go down. And maybe they also have in the back of their minds that interest rates will go down. And I believe all three will happen. So I think we'll see a temporary blip before we should have an upswing again.
So you are actually going against the popular opinion, because the popular opinion is even if the intent of demonetization was the right one, the implementation was not the right one. And the consequences on the mental approach that a lot of consumers are taking has rattled them. An environment of fear, not just for the next few months, but perhaps towards the end of the year, which stops consumption from resuming, has taken place.
No, I would think that I don't think most of that has happened. What has happened is the consumer is a very knowledgeable person. He or she is assessing clearly that property prices will probably move southwards. Why should I make a decision today? So also with other goods and services. Because their income levels are not changed. This is the consumption class where you will drive growth. And if we don't see a slowdown in industrial production, then your job losses that people are talking of also will not be to the extent that people would have tried to articulate. Farm wages are not going to drop. Farm employment is not going to drop unless people are going to shut down farming, and I don't see that happening. Last month I lived in a coffee estate for a couple of weeks, and I did not see any of the things that people are articulating is happening. And looking at other anecdotes, I do not see things happening. Yes, to drive growth back to what I desire, which is double digits, will take some effort. And there I think there are 2 keys or 3 keys. One is get investment in infrastructure going. Second, get the consumption cycle going. And third, and probably most important, get the interest rates down. So I would think that the demonetization exercise, when we look back in a couple of months from now, will have led to actually inflation going down. And that should give the confidence to drop interest rates. So we'll have a new equation in play.
And how much do you think this drop in interest rates could translate into?
See, actually, even before demonetization, if you look at inflation having stabilized, certain tough steps taken by the government, I'm talking of the 3rd quarter of the last calendar year, the quarter ending September, you did see the yield on the government bond drop by almost 70 bips. And that did not translate into any drop for the customer. And I think we will now see that drop happening because so much of cash has come into the banking system that except for the stabilization that the Reserve Bank is doing through the stabilization bonds, I would have seen interest rates come down even further. So it's a very interesting play going on out there, but ultimately I think interest rates will need to come down. And my gut is that there is at least 1% slack in terms of interest rates moving downwards.
Okay, at least 1% slack. And just going back to the economy perspective, it's not just IMF, it's the CMIE who's saying now we project India's growth to be only 6% for the next 5 years. Now this is coming from the perspective where everyone was talking about 7.6% plus for the current year, and then going forward to 8%, 8.5% in the interim near future. Does this radically change? So when do we go back, say, to the 7.5% growth according to you, or the 8% plus rates?
I would think that we need to examine what really has changed, which will bring down growth by these numbers in a catastrophic way. I don't see that catastrophe. So I would think, again, for this I need to just make an assessment. I can't see why we cannot come back to normal in 3 to 6 months. Why should it take us that long to come back to normal, if at all we have gone off normal? Whether we have gone off normal or not will come in the next reporting numbers, maybe in a quarter. I don't see a catastrophic drop having taken place. And if in the interim the government is able to push the accelerator on infrastructure and consumption goes the way I believe it will go, I don't think we will have these numbers.
Okay. What is your assessment of the fact that there has been criticism, not just in India, but globally, on the interference that governments now have on central banking authority? Coming from a noted banker like yourself, how do you feel this plays out in the sentiment, whether it's true or not, or whether it's the implied perspective of it which is also hurting sentiment?
See, I cannot comment on what is happening because I'm at a distance. But knowing the Reserve Bank in the past, I do not think the Reserve Bank is really subject to the sort of criticism that we are hearing. I do not think they are amenable to that. So I would discount it. Even central banks around the world, I think, are basically independent. What can be criticized about them is, are they too tight? And I think that is what probably will come up globally in terms of the global economy. But I don't think in the Indian context this is really an issue.
Okay, I'm going to ask you, in your perspective as the head of the NDB, as well as someone who has close ties working with the BRIC countries, approaching it in 2017. In Davos we've heard ample conversation about obviously Xi Jinping taking the mantle of globalization, trying to step into Donald Trump's shoes, so be it. But this entire perspective of who exactly is looking at globalization, who's looking at protectionism, has pretty much taken a 180-degree spin. So where does India fit in?
I think India has to carefully consider where we fit in. We are a large consuming market. We have large infrastructure needs. I think initially we need to make sure that that becomes our growth path. And thereafter, in terms of engaging with the world, in terms of an importer or an exporter, we need to take stock on that front. Clearly, I think in India's context, self-interest would come in first. And within that, I think the Make in India for India and the world, I think is a good pitch to have. And that itself should also spin the wheels for India. So India actually is well positioned because it is still a very large consumer, has still a lot to do in terms of many areas. And I think that puts us on a very strong wicket. And that's the reason why I find it difficult to believe when somebody says we are going to go down to 6%. You slide down when you have nothing to spend on, when you have no more needs. We have all the needs in the world, and at, I would say, greater pace. If you are in a deflationary world where prices are coming down, this is the time for us to invest.
So you would say that we'll possibly hit a 6.6% and then go up in the next 5 to 6 months. If you could just chart off, I know things change, but
it's purely speculative. But I would first like to see whether we actually come down to 6.6%.
Oh, so you think that also might not happen?
These are all calls made without hard numbers. So I do not want to add to it by again putting another number without hard work. And all I will say is, to add to what I said earlier, we are in a non-linear world. Things happen in a completely non-linear way. So linear equations of economic growth will not happen. And in a lighter vein, I might say that a few years back I used to say about India's growth numbers, there is a counted part, there is an uncounted part, and there is an unaccounted part. So I would guess that the unaccounted part probably will have declined post demonetization. The uncounted, that's the reliability of statistics. So you will have numbers as they have come out, and probably you make an allowance for wrong counting. and that should be the number that comes up in the future. So if this is so, I would again say that growth should not be what people are forecasting, it should be higher.
And if I say 8% in 2018, would you correct me?
No, I would not correct you at all. I would think that that certainly is feasible.
Thank you so very much, KV Kamath. Great to have your
Thank you.
perspective here
Thank
in
you.
Davos. Thank you, sir.